President Trump says he has spoken with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky about taking steps to end the war in Ukraine.
Could Trump be the key to ending the Russia-Ukraine war? In a shocking diplomatic move, he's spoken with both Putin and Zelensky, sparking speculation about direct peace talks. The Kremlin confirmed a 90-minute Trump-Putin call covering Ukraine, energy, AI, and U.S.-Russia relations. Trump then briefed Zelensky, pushing for a ceasefire and hinting at a potential Saudi summit. This is a major geopolitical development. If successful, it could reshape the global order, but there are serious questions about how realistic these talks are. Is Trump actually bringing the war closer to an end? Or is this just political maneuvering? In this video, we'll break down what was discussed, what's next, and whether this could truly lead to peace in Ukraine. Let's get into it. Donald Trump's recent phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin was not just another diplomatic conversation. It was a significant moment that could shift the trajectory of the Russia-Ukraine war. The Kremlin confirmed that this call lasted over an hour and a half, making it one of the longest direct engagements between the two leaders in recent years. While Trump described it as a productive discussion, the details emerging from Moscow reveal a high-stakes negotiation that could have major global implications. According to Trump, the conversation covered Ukraine, energy, artificial intelligence, and the dollar, all critical issues in U.S.-Russia relations. However, the most pressing topic was the war in Ukraine and the possibility of reaching a peace agreement. Putin reportedly emphasized the need to eliminate the root causes of the conflict. From Russia's perspective, this means addressing NATO's expansion eastward, which the Kremlin has long claimed as its justification for invading Ukraine. While this aligns with Russia's official narrative, it raises questions about what kind of compromises Trump might be willing to make in order to secure a deal. One of the most surprising revelations from the Kremlin statement was Putin's invitation for Trump to visit Moscow. If this happens, it would be the first visit by a U.S. president to Russia in over a decade, with the last being Barack Obama's 2013 visit for a G20 summit. Trump also mentioned that future meetings are planned, including a possible summit in Saudi Arabia. This suggests that both sides are preparing for deeper negotiations, but it also raises concerns. A Trump visit to Moscow would be seen as a symbolic victory for Putin, strengthening Russia's global position at a time when it faces Western sanctions and international isolation. While Trump claims that both he and Putin want peace, the key question remains: under what conditions? If Trump pushes for a ceasefire, will it favor Russia's territorial claims, or will Ukraine receive adequate security guarantees? This call marks the beginning of a new phase in the Ukraine conflict, one where Trump positions himself as the deal-maker. But will his negotiations lead to real peace or simply a geopolitical power play? The next steps, including Trump's upcoming talks with Zelensky, will determine how this unfolds. Following his high-profile conversation with Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump wasted no time in reaching out to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The call, which Zelensky described as detailed and productive, focused on the next steps for peace negotiations and the role of the United States in securing a resolution to the war. During the call, Trump reportedly shared details from his conversation with Putin, informing Zelensky of Russia's position on the conflict and its potential terms for peace. According to Zelensky's statement, Trump expressed confidence that the U.S. has the influence and power to push Russia toward a resolution, a crucial point given Ukraine's reliance on Western support. Zelensky emphasized that any peace deal must be fair to Ukraine and should not involve concessions that legitimize Russian aggression. While he acknowledged Trump's efforts to broker a ceasefire, he also stressed that a lasting peace would require strong security guarantees for Ukraine. A key controversy? Ukraine's NATO bid. Trump dismissed it as impractical, echoing Moscow's stance, backed by his Secretary of Defense. Zelensky, on the other hand, has consistently pushed for Ukraine's integration into Western security structures. If Trump's stance signals a shift in U.S. policy, it could have major implications for Ukraine's future defense strategy. Beyond the immediate war situation, Zelensky and Trump also discussed economic and military cooperation between Ukraine and the U.S. As part of these efforts, Ukrainian officials met with U.S. Treasury Secretary to finalize a security and economic agreement that could provide additional support to Ukraine. Ukraine plans to present its vision for security cooperation at the upcoming Munich conference, where U.S. officials, including Vice President Mike Pence, will be in attendance. With both Putin and Zelensky claiming they want peace, the question now is how negotiations will move forward. Will Trump's involvement lead to a real diplomatic breakthrough, or will differences over NATO, territorial integrity, and military aid derail these efforts? The next meetings and potential Trump-Putin summit will be crucial in determining the future of Ukraine's war and its place in global geopolitics. Trump is positioning himself as a mediator in the Russia-Ukraine war, pushing a peace plan he claims will swiftly end the conflict. But critics question whether it truly benefits Ukraine or hands Russia an advantage. His plan hinges on a ceasefire, which he says stops the bloodshed. But skeptics warn it gives Russia time to regroup and cement its territorial control. Another flashpoint? Ukraine's NATO bid. Trump calls expansion impractical, echoing Moscow's stance and raising alarms in Kyiv and among U.S. allies. His openness to keeping Ukraine out of NATO suggests a potential concession to Russia. Meanwhile, Trump has confirmed plans to meet Putin in Saudi Arabia, signaling a preference for one-on-one diplomacy over institutions like NATO or the UN, a move that could reshape the entire negotiation process. While Trump insists his approach will lead to a swift resolution, many argue that it plays directly into Putin's strategic objectives. By questioning Ukraine's NATO membership, Trump is addressing one of Putin's core demands. If NATO membership is taken off the table, Ukraine's long-term security could be weakened, giving Russia a stronger position in future negotiations. Trust in Putin's commitment to any peace deal remains a major concern. While he has expressed openness to a settlement, he continues to emphasize the need to address the root causes of the war, language that often justifies Russia's actions. Given Moscow's history of breaking ceasefires and agreements, skepticism remains high about whether Russia would honor any new deal without strong international oversight. The future of Ukraine is at stake. A peace agreement that legitimizes Russian control over occupied territories could be seen as a betrayal of Ukraine's sovereignty. Many in Ukraine insist that the war must end with a full Russian withdrawal, not just a freezing of the current front lines. China has now entered the picture, proposing a Putin-Trump summit to help facilitate a resolution to the war. While some view this as a positive diplomatic step, others remain skeptical of China's close ties with Russia and whether Beijing truly seeks peace or aims to shift global influence in its favor. If China plays a significant role in these negotiations, it could reshape not only the Ukraine war, but also global power dynamics between the US, Russia, and China. With Trump, Putin, and Zelensky now engaged in diplomatic talks, the world is watching closely to see whether this proposed peace plan leads to a real resolution or becomes another geopolitical maneuver. The upcoming Saudi Arabia meeting between Trump and Putin may serve as the first real test of how serious these negotiations are. One of the most unexpected developments in Trump's recent talks with Putin was the prisoner exchange, which saw the release of American teacher Mark Fogel from a Russian prison. This move is not just a humanitarian gesture. It could serve as a crucial diplomatic opening for broader negotiations on the Russia-Ukraine war. Mark Fogel, detained in Russia since 2021, was released in a Trump-brokered swap, possibly signaling a thaw in US-Russia talks. This prisoner swap signals that both sides are willing to negotiate, at least on certain issues. It may also set the stage for further diplomatic breakthroughs, including potential ceasefire agreements. Historically, Russia has used prisoner exchanges as a bargaining tool in larger geopolitical negotiations. By engaging in this swap, Putin may be testing how much Trump is willing to compromise in future talks. While this exchange was a positive first step, it remains to be seen whether it will lead to substantial progress on peace negotiations, or if it was simply a strategic move by Russia to gain diplomatic leverage. With Trump, Putin, and Zelensky now actively engaged in diplomatic talks, the next few weeks could determine whether this effort leads to a real peace agreement or turns into another political maneuver. A key moment in these negotiations will be the upcoming Saudi Arabia summit, where Trump and Putin are set to meet. If this meeting takes place, it could mark a turning point in discussions, potentially setting the stage for a formal peace plan. Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials and U.S. representatives will gather at the Munich conference to discuss a security and economic agreement, which could reveal how much support Ukraine can expect from Washington under Trump's influence. The possible outcomes of these negotiations remain uncertain. A temporary ceasefire, if successfully brokered by Trump, could pause the fighting but leave territorial disputes unresolved. At the same time, Trump's skepticism about Ukraine's NATO membership raises questions about whether the U.S. will continue its strong backing for Ukraine or push for a settlement that leans toward Russia's demands. If Trump's peace efforts gain traction, Biden and NATO may face pressure to reconsider their approach to Ukraine's military and financial support. The economic ripple effects of these talks are already visible. Oil prices dropped by over 2% following news of Trump's discussions with Putin and Zelensky, as markets speculated that a peace agreement could lead to the lifting of sanctions on Russian oil supplies. Additionally, U.S. crude inventories have risen for the third consecutive week, adding further pressure on prices. Beyond oil, global markets also reacted sharply. U.S. and European stock futures surged, with Euro Stoxx 50 futures climbing 1%, Nasdaq futures rising 0.4%, and S&P 500 futures gaining 0.2%. In Asia, Japan's Nikkei index advanced by 1.4%, benefiting from a weaker yen, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng index jumped 2.5% to a 4-month high. The euro also strengthened by 0.5% as optimism surrounding potential peace negotiations boosted investor confidence. However, this market optimism was tempered by concerns over rising U.S. inflation. Recent U.S. inflation data showed the largest price increase in nearly 1.5 years, pushing Treasury yields higher and leading investors to reassess expectations for Federal Reserve rate cuts. Meanwhile, Trump's announcement of potential reciprocal tariffs on U.S. trade partners added another layer of uncertainty, raising concerns about escalating trade tensions. These financial shifts indicate that traders are closely watching Trump's diplomatic efforts, reinforcing the idea that his negotiations could have far-reaching consequences beyond the battlefield. Whether this marks the beginning of the end of the war or simply another geopolitical maneuver, the world will be watching closely to see what happens next. Trump is making moves in the Ukraine war, talks with Putin and Zelensky, a prisoner swap, and plans for future summits. But is this real diplomacy or just political theater? Is this the beginning of the end of the war or just another geopolitical power play? Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you believe Trump can successfully negotiate peace, or is this just political theater? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more updates.